If you're thinking about picking up a 70 to 200mm lens for your Lmount camera, then chances are you're stuck deciding between the Sigma 70 to 200 2.8 and the LUMIX S PRO 70 to 200 2.8. Well, in this video, we're going to walk through how they stack up against each other and which one's probably right for you. So before we get into actually putting these side by side to the test, let's walk through some of the essentials that you should probably know about these lenses before you pick them up. Now, for one, the Sigma is a hell of a lot cheaper than the LUMIX at around $1,650 US MSRP, whereas the LUMIX is around $2,300 US MSRP. Now, that price difference might be justified by the amount of glass in these lenses. The LUMIX one is quite a bit heavier, about half a pound worth if we're talking imperial, and it also has more lens elements and element groups in it. So that typically would lead to a better image quality, but Sigma is also fantastic, so we're really gonna have to put them side by side to see. I haven't really noticed much of a difference in the visual look of these lenses using one and then the other, but we'll put them in some super fair comparisons and see how they stack up. The LUMIX lens is also a little bit bigger than the Sigma, not by any noticeable margin, maybe a centimeter or so, both width and height, but that's not really a huge deal. The weight is pretty substantial though. Even though this is a quite heavy lens, this is even heavier. So carrying this around all day is quite a task, to be honest. Now, just a disclaimer, this LUMIX lens is actually a loaner. So I've only had it for a few days and I only have it for another day after this. So because this lens is a loaner, it actually came to me without a lens hood. So I've taken the lens hood off the Sigma as well to make sure things are fair, but we're not really in lens hood conditions right now. The sun is all but gone behind the clouds in the mountains. Now, for what it's worth, this LUMIX lens is actually older than the Sigma. The Sigma came out in 2023, whereas this LUMIX came out in 2019, actually. Now, these lenses are almost identical in a lot of ways. There's not a whole lot that sets them apart. One thing for sure to note is that the Sigma actually has a closer minimum focus distance than the LUMIX. It's about 65 centimeters for the Sigma and about 95 centimeters for the LUMIX. You're almost a whole meter out before you can start focusing on stuff. There are some standout features on the outside of the Sigma that are worth noting. For one, it's got an aperture ring. The LUMIX just doesn't. As much as I don't really use aperture rings, I tend to just leave it on auto because the LUMIX aperture control on the camera body itself is actually fantastic. It has it, and it is declickable. You can flick a switch and get it fully declickable and smooth aperture. It also has the regular switch, autofocus to manual focus on it, which I personally really like. And it's got a 77mm thread length for filters and whatnot. Now, the LUMIX also has a couple standout features on the outside. One of them really caught me off guard and it actually took me a day to figure out how to use it. For the switch between auto and manual focus, it actually has a clutch. So you pull this back if you want it to go into manual focus, you push it forward for autofocus. Really cool. I mean, it's nice to use. I haven't seen it before, so it kind of caught me off guard, and I'm not sure if I really need that. Like, I'm not switching between auto and manual that often. A much more hard to accidentally hit switch on the side would be desirable for me personally. Now, when you put the LUMIX into manual focus, you do get access to these numbers here, which dictate how far out you're focusing, which is kind of handy as well. The Sigma does not have that as an option. Its tripod collar is also a lot easier to work with. Whereas the Sigma, you need to take all 4 screws out. The LUMIX, you can just unscrew this one half turn, pull it up, and take it off. As easy as that. Now, the downside of that system is it's not quite as strong as the Sigma. I can, even though it's locked into place, fully turn it if I push hard enough, whereas the Sigma, it's pretty locked in. Now, the LUMIX has an 82mm thread length, which I actually kind of like because my 24-70 is an 82mm thread length, even my Sigma 24-70, so it makes it a lot easier to use stuff between both lenses. Like, I could put this filter onto this lens, but there's nothing wrong with 77 on the Sigma. So another big thing that kind of sets these apart, which isn't really consequential, but might be very consequential depending on how you like to shoot and the other lenses you have, the zoom and focus are switched around on these. So on the LUMIX, this big one here is the zoom, this small one's the focus. On the Sigma, this big one here is the zoom, and this small one's the focus. So, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but honestly, I prefer the LUMIX version. That's more consistent with a lot of other Lmount lenses than the Sigmas, but honestly, no complaints, really. It's a 70-200. I'm using autofocus almost all the time. So let's go through the on-lens controls on each lens, starting with the LUMIX. So we've got the clutch, focus, autofocus, manual focus thing there. We already discussed that. And we also have 3 programmable function buttons. I believe you can only program them to do one thing, and they all do the same, all 3. The Sigma has the exact same thing, so that's not too big of a deal. We also have 2 switches on the side. One for focus limiting. So limiting from 5 meters to infinity, limiting from 0.95 meters to 5 meters, and unlimited full focus range. This is helpful for autofocus. Say you're taking pictures of race cars through a fence. You can limit it to anything after 5 meters and they won't try to autofocus onto the fence. It also has optical image stabilization, modes 1, 2, and off. 2 is the most common one you'll probably want to use. It's up, down, left, right. 1, I believe, is just side to side, and off is, well, off. So we have started getting a little bit of rain out here, but that's not really a big deal because these lenses are both weather sealed. The Sigma one itself is actually from the Sport line, so it is extra durable and extra weather sealed. I haven't put them side by side and stacked them up, like thrown them in the water, obviously, but they're both weather sealed, and the Sigma is known to be very good in weather sealed. Now on the Sigma controls, we do have those same 3 programmable function buttons. They are a bit easier to click on this, which I kind of like. They're a bit bigger and a bit more natural to press, but really no difference between them. We also have a lot more controls on the side. So we have autofocus, manual focus, which is great. We have the focus limiter, so that is null about 65 centimeters, 3 meters, 3 meters to infinity, and full. We also have the optical image stabilization, off 1 and 2. We're gonna leave it on 2 for now. And then we have custom modes. So you can actually hook this up with the Sigma dock, which I don't own, program in custom modes for focusing speeds and stuff like that. I don't really know how that works. I don't have a Sigma dock, but you can do that and you can set custom modes on it. We're just gonna leave that off because, yeah. The last control is a toggle switch for clicking on the aperture ring. So right now it's clicking, now it's not. Okay, so we're out of the rain now. A little bit wet, but started to dry off, and I did clean all the water droplets off of the lenses. We're gonna do a sharpness test. So I'm gonna take the same photo at a few different focal lengths on each lens, and we'll be able to compare and contrast their sharpness and how the image looks overall. These images, if the lenses are identical, should look exactly the same, but we're gonna be able to zoom in and see it quite well. My commentary is going to be done in post because I won't be able to look at it when I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. Now to start off, we're just going to be taking pictures of the Ford Maverick back there because it's an easy subject. Maybe I'll pop over there for a self-portrait later, but we'll see about that after. So we're starting on the Sigma at 70 millimeters. Let's see how this shot goes. Now we're going to about 135, so we'll take a couple of shots there. And now we'll go to the full 200. All right, time to switch lens to the Lumix and we'll see how it stacks up. Okay, now we got the Lumix lens on, so let's take these same shots, same exact settings, same focal lengths, and see how they stack up. Let's start with 70 mil. Okay, and now we're gonna move to 135. And now it's time for the full 200. That is all 6 photos taken, so now let's throw it to inside jack and we'll see how those all stack up. Inside jack here. Okay, so there were actually a few quite notable differences in the camera's performances when it comes to sharpness. Let's go into Photoshop and we'll check those out together. Okay, so I've got the individual photos in Photoshop right now and we're looking at them. This is the 200 millimeter shot from the Lumix and this is the 200 millimeter shot from the Sigma. Pretty similar, not gonna lie. They look pretty much identical at this point. The only difference is some slight difference in reflections because the sky moved, obviously, a little bit. It was an overcast day, but different clouds and whatnot. So a little bit different lighting here and there, but nothing too crazy. The only main difference I notice on this wider of the 200 shots is the left tire here, or I guess it's the right tire. The passenger side tire is a little bit darker in the Lumix than the Sigma, and it almost looks as if there's a polarizer on the Lumix lens. If you turn it on, you can see it's darker and lost a lot of its sheen. You turn it back off, on the Sigma, it doesn't have that. There isn't a polarizer on it, obviously, but it kind of looks that way. I'm not sure if that's something with the lens or if that's just the lighting coincidentally did something weird like that. But there is one much more noticeable difference. That's kind of the standout difference in these lenses. So let's go into a close-up of the Ford logo on the truck. So you can see here, this is the Lumix lens, and we can see quite a bit of chromatic aberration. Side note, sorry for all the dead bugs in the front of the car. Actually, it was much worse before that rain hit, so you're actually kind of lucked out that it got rainy that day. But yeah, if you look at the Ford logo, you can see some red here, a little bit of blue, some green along the chrome, and that's chromatic aberration. That's something you kind of want to avoid in lenses. It's not too bad, right? This is ultra zoomed in on the 200 millimeter shot of chrome, fine detailed chrome. So like, we're asking for chromatic aberration at this point, but it's there. And if we go to the Sigma, it's not there. Not nearly as much. The Sigma is a lot more smooth and has less chromatic aberration. Now, I will note that the Lumix does seem a little bit sharper, I think, It's kind of hard to tell with that chromatic aberration going on, but the Sigma looks better in my opinion, even though it's not quite as sharp. It's a negligible amount of sharpness that it's missing, and it kind of makes up for it in just being a cleaner image. It's not only on this chrome emblem that we see that effect. If we go over to a close-up of the hood, you can see here, this is the Lumix. See that green going across the panel right there, and then on the inside a little bit of purple, as well as on the outside here a little bit of purple. Let's switch that over to the Sigma. It's just not there. It's not as sharp. Granted, I think the focus was a few centimeters difference between the two probably. I had it on autofocus for the front of the truck, but it's just not there. It's a lot cleaner on the Sigma. So that's a thing, right? The Lumix is a little bit sharper, but it has much more chromatic aberration. Now, I also noticed a bit more chromatic aberration on shots of people as well with Lumix lens compared to the Sigma lens. So it's not just this reflective car alone. Now, if we go to the 135, this is the shot that we took around 135 millimeters on each camera. It's kind of the same thing going on, looks pretty much the same, except the Sigma has a little bit of vignetting around the outside of the image. So take a look at the side here, or the other side here. This is on the Lumix lens right now. Let's disable that and look at the Sigma. It's got a bit of a vignette. And now I didn't notice this vignetting effect at 70 mil, and I didn't notice it at 200 mil. I only noticed it at the 135 mil photo. I didn't take more in between to see when it comes and when it goes, but it's a little bit there. It's not the end of the world. In fact, I kind of think it looks nice, but it's something that I kind of noticed, right? You can see it gets a little bit darker, especially compared to the Lumix lens, while the center stays about the same exposure. And if we go and zoom in on the Ford logo here as well, we can see obviously much lower resolution because it's 135 zoomed to the same amount, but you can see this is the Lumix. You got the sort of pinks and greens all along there. Turn that off. On the Sigma, we just don't. Now, we can go all the way to the 70 mil, but there's not really a whole lot to look at here. Again, it's very similar. You're not seeing that vignetting effect. A little bit of a different type of distortion. These photos aren't corrected for lens distortion. I did that on purpose. But again, it's negligible. We can go to the tighter, and yeah, you can see a little bit of the chromatic aberration. If you look up at the top of the truck here, you can see some kind of bluish like glow on the outside. We get rid of that and go to the Sigma. That's just not there. So at the end of the day, it kind of looks like the Lumix is the sharper of the two lenses, but it's got a pretty significant amount of chromatic aberration that the Sigma doesn't have. Now, mind you, that's hardly any chromatic aberration at all relative to other lenses. This is a really good lens and it's hardly there, but in the Sigma, it's not really there at all. All right, now it's time to do an autofocus speed test. So we're gonna compare the Sigma lens and the Lumix lens's autofocus speeds for photography. So how are we testing the focus speed? Well, simple enough. I'm focusing to the minimum on the lens, switching it to single autofocus, and then pressing the button, and we're gonna see how long it takes to focus on the car over there. If it takes a long time, then we'll know it's slower. If it's quick every time, we'll know it's faster. We'll do a few rounds of this just to make sure it's consistent and not a fluke, and we'll go from there. The Sigma, if anything, has a bit of a disadvantage because it can actually focus closer than the Lumix can. So it has further distance, granted only like 30 centimeters, to go and actually focus on the object, which is the car. So we'll see how it performs. Now, typically you'd expect the third-party lens to have the worst performing autofocus because they might not get access to all the proprietary software and info that they need to know to make a perfect autofocusing lens. However, Sigma and Lumix are both part of the Lmount Alliance. It's a small group of companies that have all decided to work and build on Lmount as kind of like a universal mount to be used across brands. So with that in mind, they both have access to all the info that they need to make the best product possible. And since the Sigma is newer, it's kind of got a bit of an edge, right? It's got 4 or so years of more development in autofocus technology and focus motors and all that stuff to make the better product. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Sigma does better here. And focus test in 3, 2, 1. That was quick. That was quick. So the Lumix lens performed impressively quick for all of the takes I did. We'll have the rounded out average time right up there. So that's roughly how long it took, how many frames at least from this camera shooting until it was actually focused. These lenses are so awkward to change with one another. It is kind of insane. And these big collars are not a help either. Oh, geez. Now the Sigma's up. Let's see how it stacks up again at 135 millimeters at f2.8. Okay, and this is focus test in 3, 2, 1. That was quick. Wow. That was quick. That was quick. Focus test in the Sigma. Second go in 3, 2, 1. Wow. That is so quick. Okay, so the Sigma felt a lot faster, and the Lumix was very fast already. So like incredibly impressively fast is what the Sigma felt like. Yeah, no complaints there. We'll see how it performed, and this is the time it took. So Inside Jack will tell you all about that. Okay, so those were pretty crazy results and kind of unexpected. The Lumix lens took around 8 or 9 frames on average to focus all the way from out of focus to completely in focus and like showing the green square on the screen. That's what I marked as in focus. The Sigma, on the other hand, took 6 or 7, but it was in focus in 3. So the lens actually went from out of focus fully to in focus, but then it actually took an extra 3 or 4 each time to go each time and give the green square. So it focused in 3 frames most of the time, and it gave the beep in around 6. The Lumix lens took 8 or 9 to fully focus, and it only beeped when it was focused pretty much right away. So the Lumix lens was a lot slower. Look at them side by side, like the Sigma versus the Lumix. The Sigma is way faster. So if you're thinking about getting this lens for shooting animals or sports or something that happens really fast, the Sigma might actually be the one to go for. Okay, so now I actually am gonna take a couple of self-portraits so you can see what a person looks like in a photo on this lens. I'm gonna do it with the Lumix Lab app, which is a great app you can use to control your Lumix camera. So we're gonna do that with both cameras, and we're gonna see how they turn out. So yeah, if you're looking for a new sexy wallpaper, you're about to get one.
Brother,
Okay, so we're gonna start with the Lumix Lab app, taking some pictures at 200 millimeters, and I've got a line marked in the dirt, so I know where to come back to with the Sigma lens, and we'll see how they turn out. Where's the line? There it is. And now you have a sexy new wallpaper. Okay, and that joke is already old. But yeah, these lenses did do a great job. They focused on me, they shot, it looks great, except for my wet hair. Now, I did get some other photos on these lenses. In fact, I went to national parks to find animals to shoot for you guys. Didn't see shit. So I found some cows. The Lumix lens, I got a couple sort of meh shots of some cows on the road. The Sigma lens, I was able to get up and close a few days later. And so there's some good shots. These lenses work well for what they do, and they did a really good job. I got some other portraits of my friend Jeremy, and overall, these lenses are super great to work with and honestly quite beautiful in the images they produce. But the images they produce are pretty darn similar. Like, I can't tell them apart just by looking at them. Like, if I look at the 2 pictures of myself, I don't know which one was taken on which lens. They look like they were taken on the same lens, which is kind of a good thing and is kind of a pain in the butt as someone trying to compare the lenses. But all right, let's move on to the stabilization test. Now, I did a couple tests for stabilization on these lenses. The Lumix has 7 stops of stabilization ability in the lens, and the Sigma has 7.5. So they're pretty comparable as far as the numbers go. And I did some very rudimentary tests. I did one where I was standing still and holding the camera with the lens at 200 millimeters looking at a sign, and I did another one walking looking at that same sign. One thing I'll note is that the Sigma stabilization looked stronger, but it was only temporary, if that makes sense. So it almost looked as if, you know, it caught on and it held stable in one spot until I moved a little too far, and then it jittered around until it caught another spot, held on, and then kind of jittered around. Like, it was able to stabilize really well when it did, but when it didn't, it wasn't as great. It was kind of jittering around trying to find another place to stabilize. I don't really know why that happened or how that worked. Both lenses were on the same mode when I tested them. The Lumix lens, on the other hand, it kind of just didn't look like it had stabilization on, in that it was a lot smoother, but a lot more just small jitters. It wasn't as jittery as the Sigma at the jittery points, but it was nowhere near as smooth as the Sigma at the smooth points. So honestly, which one's better? I'm not too sure. The Sigma, I would say, is probably better for photography. It will hold the spot you're trying to get until you get the shot. The Lumix one's probably better for video because it doesn't look all artificially jarring and locking and then moving and then locking and then moving. It's more of a natural handheld flow look to it, which is better for video capture. All right, so now we're at the important part, the conclusion, where I tell you kind of what my thoughts are on these lenses. Now, bear with me, I do have some notes just off screen, so if it looks like I'm looking off to the side, that is why I have quite a bit to say. So both cameras are fantastic choices. The Lumix is marginally better when it comes to sharpness, but then it has that chromatic aberration that comes in that kind of just negates that. But on most other fronts, the Sigma is kind of on par or superior to the Lumix. The focus speed is a lot quicker, a lot quicker. It's a bit cleaner of an image, less chromatic aberration. It can focus a lot closer. I think it's like 65 centimeters or something is the minimum focus distance, whereas the Lumix is 95. It weighs less and it's a hell of a lot cheaper, and that's kind of a big important part. It is way cheaper. Now, something to note, and I put it in graphics at the start of the video, but I didn't say it. The Lumix lens has actually gone up in price recently, in the USA at least. And in Canada, it's gone down a bit. But where tariffs are affecting it in the US, it's gone up a couple $100 more. So it's even more expensive than the Sigma. And that's something that Lumix is kind of saying that they're doing. They're responding to the tariffs, and they're just charging you more if you live in the United States. That's what you get with tariffs. That's just kind of how they work. But those aren't forever. They might be gone when you're watching this video. They might be worse. Who knows? But check the prices, because the ones I said in this video might not be as accurate because of that. Now, the Sigma even has a better warranty than the Lumix. The Sigma has a 4-year warranty in the United States if purchased from an authorized dealer, and a 7-year warranty for Canada if purchased from an authorized retailer. I didn't buy this one from an authorized retailer. I got an open box one on Amazon for a hell of a lot cheaper than the MSRP, so I only have a 1-year warranty. But that is a fantastic warranty policy. I mean, if you're in Canada or probably some other countries, 7 years of any parts or labor that go into something going wrong in this lens. That's good. The only real thing that actually bothers me about this lens is that when it's not powered on and connected to a camera, it rattles. Like the focus motors inside, they don't lock when they're not powered, they rattle around, which is just kind of annoying. I mean, it's not the end of the world, it's not as breaking, but it's not great. The Lumix doesn't do it. But while I can sing my praise to the Sigma, it's not all bad for the Lumix. I will say the Lumix lens looks and feels much better in the hand and is kind of just nicer to use. It's a lot more ergonomic, I found, even though it's heavier. Its stabilization appears a bit smoother, which is probably better for video, although it's less powerful. It has easier, more ergonomic controls. Like, I really like having the zoom closer to the camera body. It's the one you're moving more with a 70-200. You're not focusing manually on these lenses a lot, and having the zoom all the way at the front, kind of tucked in with a lens hood, is a bit of a pain, I found, when shooting with the Sigma. It also just makes rigging up a camera easier if you're doing that with a 70-200, that you can probably guess where the focus is, where the zoom is, so if you're setting up a follow focus, it's just easier. It also feels a lot more stable, right? It doesn't rattle. And it has a 3-year extended warranty in the US and only a 1-year warranty in Canada. So here's my kind of advice at the end of the day. If you are a solo shooter, freelance photographer, videographer, working for a small company where the extra few $100 is something you don't want to spend, the Sigma is absolutely the better choice. It's definitely worth it to save that money because this lens performs just as well, if not superior to the Lumix lens in a lot of ways, a lot of the time. It's lighter, it's cheaper, and it's still durable and faster focusing and just great. Now, if you're looking for a 70-200 for, entirely video production at a small production studio or something like that, I think the Lumix is probably the better choice. For one, it's got simpler controls and layout. It's just easier to work with. You know where the zoom is, you know where the focus is. You can get that color on and off a lot easier. It's just simpler to work with. It's gonna look very similar to footage from other Lumix lenses. So if you have the LUMIX S Prime series or Leica lenses, it's gonna match those very well. And to be honest, it's just got more of that professional finish on it. It's a LUMIX branded lens. It looks good with the camera. It'll look like a very professional camera setup. And it'll be easier to identify. If you're working with different camera systems, this lens is for the LUMIX. You're not accidentally grabbing the Leica Lmount Sigma lens for your Sony E-mount camera, and you mistakenly took the L-mount instead of the E-mount because you have both, right? They look identical. So for that case, I would probably go with the LUMIX lens. But otherwise, if you're a solo shooter or anything like I just said, the Sigma's probably the way to go. But which one would you choose? Have you used any of these lenses before? Do you have either of these lenses? And kind of what are your thoughts on them? I'd love to know in the comments below. If If I got anything wrong, be sure to point it out. I'll be sure to pin your comment. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like it, subscribe, comment, all the YouTuber BS. You can follow me on social media at JackCPMadden for any silly camera videos and whatnot. And thank you for watching. Take care.